Subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so that you do not miss any video lesson from RAU'S. Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why and how of newspaper reading. Today we are going to analyze the Hindu dated 14th of May 2020. We are very proud to announce RAU'S hybrid online program to prepare for Civil Service Examination 2021. The program is designed in such a manner that it will ensure same quality content at your home as we deliver here at our campuses. It also gives you the flexibility to join our campuses as and when you are ready to join the physical class program at our learning centers. Our GSI hybrid course has been designed to provide 360-degree guidance. First, our teachers cover everything from basic to advanced, and given the dynamic nature of the exam, we focus on both the static syllabus and the current affairs. Second, we focus a lot on discussions and doubt solving to be able to impart real understanding of issues important for exam, and so we promote group discussions and make expert doubt solving available to you at all times. Third, testing is another key requirement to crack the exam. The course gives you ample practice through class test and UPSC level test series. Finally, just before the prelims and mains exam, we help you in revising everything important through our highly targeted revision modules. If you want more information, you can log on to our website and download the GSI hybrid brochure. The description of the video has the link for that as well. You can get in touch with us using your preferred way. All the necessary details are given in the brochure, so please refer to that. From the entire team of RAU'S, we wish you all the very best, and we will be happier to partner with you in your journey of success. Displayed on the screen is a list of articles that we are going to discuss today. Timestamping for the same has been provided in the description of the video. Let's begin our analysis. We are aware of the fact that Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi has given a call for Atmanirbhar Bharat or self-reliant India. He has given this call to tackle the economic hardships which are created by COVID-19 pandemic. In this context, he has clearly identified 5 pillars which would ensure that India become self-reliant in this particular aspect. These 5 pillars are: first, economy; second, infrastructure; third, system; fourth, vibrant democracy; and fifth is demand. In his address to the nation, he had highlighted that government would be coming out with a special economic and comprehensive package of around 20 lakh crore. This package would be equivalent to around 10% of India's GDP. At the same time, he clearly mentioned that this package includes earlier package announced by the government under the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, and also various other steps which are taken by RBI to ensure liquidity in the economy. Now, in the light of the announcement made by the Prime Minister, the Finance Minister has now come out with the first set of package under the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The total support extended through this package would be around 6 lakh crores. So in this context, it is important for us to understand that if we include 1.7 lakh crore support under the PM Garib Kalyan Yojana, rupees 4.5 lakh crore liquidity support which was given by RBI, the total value of the economic package so far would be in tune to around rupees 12 lakh crores. It simply implies that the remaining 8 lakh crore package would be announced by the Finance Minister in the coming few days. So in this context, it is important for us to understand what kind of economic package is ensured through various steps of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Now we are aware of the fact that the first stimulus in this context relates to MSMEs. So in this context, let's try to understand what is the current definition of MSMEs and how this stimulus package is going to change this definition for these micro, small and medium enterprises. At the same time, how this stimulus package is going to help them to expand their operations without imposing any kind of liability which was earlier in place because of the 2006 Act. In the same context, there is an editorial as well by the name of Liquidity Lifeline on page number 6. These articles are very important from the perspective of economy of India. At the same time, these are important from the perspective of coming examination as well. Through our analysis of all these articles, we will try to put across a consolidated vision so that you have a complete picture which reflects the true state of economy and the kind of initiatives the government has taken for various sectors. Now, in this context, since yesterday's package was focused more for micro, small and medium enterprises, today we'll be talking about the steps that the government has taken. In this context, we need to understand what is the existing state of MSMEs. This is reflected in the table 1. At the same time, with the announcement by the government, there has been a revised MSME classification, which is highlighted in the second part. Apart from that, we'll be focusing on the problems with the existing definition, means the definition which was prior to the announcement by the government on yesterday. So we'll try to focus on the kind of problems that these announcements have solved to an extent, and then we'll expand it to the other sectors. So let's first understand the existing MSME classification, in which there was a need to make changes and government to an extent has incorporated those changes. Now we will focus on the classification aspect first. The MSMEs, as the name suggests, are classified in 3 categories. First is micro, second is small, and third is medium. Now when we talk about these kind of classification, they have another parameter added to that, and that is to which segment of economy they contribute. They either contribute to manufacturing sectors or they contribute to the service sector. Now in case they are contributing to manufacturing sector, so investment limit should be less than 25 lakhs. This is true for micro enterprises. For a small, it should be less than 5 crore, and for medium, it should be less than 10 crores. Similarly, when you talk about the service sector, the investment limit was less than 10 lakh. Similarly, for small, it was less than 2 crores, and for medium enterprises, the investment was less than 5 crores. So these were the major classification in terms of MSMEs. Now, as an organization grows from micro to small to medium, there are some expectations and legal requirements from these firms in terms of ensuring better accounting practices, ensuring more facilities for their labor and employed people, and there are many other legal requirements. Now, because of this particular reason, these micro, small and medium enterprises do not want to scale up. And this is the reason why India's MSME sector has remained small in nature. Now, when we see this particular thing in terms of the announcement made by the government, we can see that the MSME classification has been raised. For micro, small and medium, the investment limits have increased. Now, for micro, both for manufacturing and services under one category, investment less than 1 crore and turnover less than 5 crore. Similarly, for small, investment less than 10 crore and turnover less than 50 crore. And for medium, investment less than 20 crore and turnover less than 100 crore. So these criteria have been laid out to ensure that MSMEs can expand their operations, and as and when they expand, they do not have to conform to new norms or regulations or legal aspect in terms of expanding their business. Now this is also highlighted in terms of the problems that MSME sector has faced. Now the definition of MSME has been provided in the MSME Act of 2006. And we have seen that MSMEs are defined in terms of investment in plant and machinery or equipment as displayed in this table as well. Now the problems that are highlighted with this kind of a setup is the first aspect. The investment limits are obsolete in nature to cover the need of today and beyond. Now in this context, it is important for us to know that MSME Act was set in 2006 and the price limits were set accordingly. Today, when we are operating in 2020 and looking for a future much beyond, we need to understand the kind of investment limits that were set in 2006 is actually not indicative of the true nature of MSME enterprises. And this is what the problem that author has also highlighted. Definition based on investment limit in plant, machinery, equipment were decided way back in 2006, and these do not reflect the current increase in the price index. We know that the cost of plant, machinery, labor and many other related aspects have increased in recent past. It is also expected that the prices will not come down in future. They are expected to grow up as well. And hence, this kind of investment limit, which was more of a old in nature and is not dynamic in terms of the current needs of the industry, and hence there need to be a rectification. Now, the second important problem that we have seen in the case of MSMEs is that MSMEs, due to their informal and small scale operation, often do not maintain proper books of accounts and hence find it difficult to get classified as MSMEs as per the current definition. So we need to understand that the kind of small enterprises which can be classified under MSMEs, but because of the lack of proper accounting system, these are not given that status, and hence they miss on many kind of benefits that government offer to these sectors. Third problem which is related to MSMEs is that presently the MSMEs get a number of benefits from the government such as collateral free loans, tax concession, etc. Hence, if they lose the status of MSME, then they would no longer be able to avail these benefits. Hence, in order to avoid losing the status of MSMEs, the industry deliberately keep their investment level below the threshold mentioned in the MSMED Act. In simple words, we can say that MSMEs are not willing to scale up and thereby lose the benefits. Hence, in a way, the existing definition has incentivized the MSMEs to remain smaller rather than incentivizing them to grow bigger and create more number of job opportunities. So these are the three basic problems that are basically addressed through the major stimulus of package for MSME from the finance minister. Now, it is very important for us to understand the kind of package the government has offered in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. You must be aware of the fact that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, Indian economy was not doing very well. In this context, most of the economists have commented that India basically lacks the demand for goods, and that was the reason why Indian economy was not growing as fast as it was expected. So we can safely say that before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, the Indian economy was suffering from lack of demand. And this was reflected in many sectors of an economy, whether we talk about banking or even the core sectors. Now, this problem became much more difficult to handle because COVID has now impacted not only the demand side but also the supply side. Now, in order to understand this idea in detail, let's focus on the diagram which is given on the right hand side of the screen. Now, after the COVID-19 pandemic, it has actually led to twin shocks. And when we talk about twin shocks, it focuses on demand as well as supply side. Now, we are aware of the fact that Indian economy was suffering because of lack of demand. At the same time, the COVID-19 has caused widespread lockdown across the country. And this has led to closing of many business organizations. Once the country has gone down into lockdown and closure, this has led to loss of jobs and production output for many companies. And this has actually led to lack of money among the public as such. Earlier, the country was suffering from lack of demand, but now there is no demand. At the same time, supply side is also badly affected. Now, this has done what? This has done decline in investment and consumption expenditure. And this is the reason why we see a lot of problems being faced by labor class and also of other sectors of economy. Now, this has led to decrease in profit margin and loss of jobs, and this in turn has increased the NPAs, that is non-performing assets, because these business houses have taken loans and now they cannot service these loans. This led to poor financial positioning of banks and NBFCs, and this in turn has led to contagion impact on other critical sectors such as real estate, manufacturing, IT sector, etc. So we can see that this is a vicious cycle. One thing leads to another, and this circular system is self-perpetuating in nature. Now, government is aware of the fact the kind of impact COVID-19 has on demand as well as in supply, and hence the government is figuring out a smart mechanism to handle this problem. Now, we need to understand what kind of a smartness the government has shown in terms of package offered through Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. Now, there are some estimates available that banks within India are sitting on a surplus cash of around rupees 8 lakh crores. These banks are apprehensive of extending loans to some of the critical sectors such as MSMEs, NBFCs, etc. due to the fear of increase of NPAs. We are aware of the fact that because of lockdown, these companies are not functioning, so there is no point of extending loans to these companies. So what they are doing with this money? They are trying to invest this money in the repo, and for this particular investment, the RBI has to pay interest to this bank. So we can see that banks have cash and they're not utilizing this cash in productive activities. They are using this cash in order to earn interest through RBI. And that is what the government is trying to handle by using this surplus cash and motivating the banks to lend more to the economy. So the point is how to incentivize or nudge the banks to extend the loans to these sectors. The answer is very simple. We know that banks invest in government securities because they consider them to be safe. And hence, what government needs to do, they need to guarantee the repayment of loan extended by banks to certain critical sectors such as MSMEs, NBFCs, MFIs, HFCs, etc. Now the point that we need to understand that once these banks get sovereign guarantee which is extended by the government of India, this would nudge the bank to give their surplus cash in the form of loan to these sectors. Now why this is so? When the banks are investing in the repo agreement, then they are getting less interest. At the same time, when they are going to extend the loans to these critical sectors, what will happen? They will earn more interest. At the same time, this investment in terms of principal as well as interest is guaranteed by the government. Hence, a major part of the first set of economic package has been geared towards the sovereign guarantee to be extended to the bank loan given to MSMEs, NBFCs and so on. Now this is considered to be a smart move by the government. The government has done a very simple thing. They have ensured that they would control fiscal deficit and they've also ensured that there will be credit creation in the economy which is guaranteed by the government itself. If you might have seen some of the recent debates in the news media channel as well as newspaper, people have asked this question very regularly. From where the government will get the money to finance these kind of projects which are in tune of 20 lakh crores. Now in this case we have seen that government has gone for more of a financial management of existing cash which is available to the banks. Now the banks are sitting on the surplus cash of 8 lakh crores and this surplus cash can be directed to ensure credit creation in the economy which could improve the supply side of the economy. So what kind of a model the government is taking? The government is focusing on first improving the supply side, and once the supply side is improved in terms of ensuring better credit in the market, this will lead to employment creation, and once employment is created it would lead to improvement in demand as well. And hence, in order to break the vicious cycle of the problem caused by COVID-19 pandemic, the government is working on a different kind of cycle which would improve supply side, which will lead to creation of employment, which in turn will create improvement in demand, and this will lead to improvement in supply side as well. So we can see that this is what the perspective of the government is in terms of the package that is being offered, and hence we have discussed about the nature of the package offered by the government. Now let us focus on the kind of economic package that government has rolled out for MSMEs. Now you must be aware of the fact that MSME sector employs around 111 million people and is considered as the second largest employer after agriculture. As far as the contribution to the economy goes, it contributes around 30% of the GDP and 45% of our manufacturing export. These MSMEs have been badly hit by COVID-19 and need additional funding to meet their operational liabilities, buy raw materials and kickstart their business operation. With this thing in mind, the government has come out with 6-point economic package to infuse liquidity in MSMEs. Now in this context, let's first focus upon collateral-free automatic loan for standard MSMEs. Now here you need to understand what is standard MSME. Those MSMEs who have not defaulted on the repayment of loans and their accounts are categorized as standard assets by banks are considered to be standard MSMEs. Now banks and NBFCs will extend collateral-free loans worth rupees 3 lakh crores to these standard MSMEs. Now when we talk about eligibility for these loans, these are applied for standard MSMEs. Now the feature of the loans are these loans will have a 4-year tenure with a moratorium of 12 months on the principal repayment. Interest rates will also be capped at the upper limit. Now the government role in this context is very clear. The government is providing 100% credit guarantee cover to banks and NBFCs on both principal as well as on interest. This particular initiative, the government is expected to benefit around 45 lakh MSMEs, and this will lead to a big boost in employment creation as well. Now the second aspect of economic package being offered to MSMEs is subordinate debt for stressed MSMEs. Now let's try to understand what is the meaning of subordinate debt first. Now when we talk about any kind of a loan or debt, the loans which are raised by the company could be categorized as subordinate and non-subordinate debt. Now what distinguishes these debts? The non-subordinate debt enjoy higher priority over the subordinate debt in terms of repayment. Now in order to understand, let's take a situation that a company which has taken both subordinate and non-subordinate loan. The company is on the verge of closure and the company is required to pay back its borrowing. In such a case, the company has the responsibility to first settle its non-subordinate debt. and only if the company is left with sufficient money, only then subordinate debt would be repaid. Hence, the subordinate debt is riskier as compared to non-subordinate debt and hence carry higher rate of interest. So in the context of prelims, what is important for you to know that subordinate debt is riskier and would command higher interest rate. Now, in terms of the package announced by the government, the new announcement seeks to provide the shape to the budget proposal. Now, in the budget of 2020-21, the finance minister had announced that a scheme would be introduced to provide subordinated debt to the entrepreneurs of the MSMEs. Under this scheme, the bank would provide subordinated debt to MSMEs. This subordinate debt provided by the banks shall be in the form of quasi-equity. That is, the bank could acquire stakes in the ownership of MSMEs. So how banks are going to extend subordinate debts to these stressed MSMEs? The banks are expected to provide subordinate debt to promoters of such MSMEs equal to the 15% of the existing stake in the unit subject to the maximum limit of rupees 75 lakh. Now, in this context, how government would support bank in terms of credit guarantee? The government would provide rupees 4,000 crore to Credit Guarantee Fund Trust for micro and small enterprises, and the CGTMSE would in turn provide partial credit guarantee support to banks. This means that any loss incurred by the bank on providing subordinate debt to MSMEs would be partially repaid back by the CGTMSE. So in this way, we can see that government has rolled out economic package not only to the standard MSMEs but also for the stressed MSMEs. The third point that we need to understand is equity infusion in MSME through fund of funds. Now in this context, it is very important for us to understand what is fund of funds. Now in simple terms, the fund of funds is a fund that makes indirect investment in various sectors such as startups, electronic manufacturing industries, MSMEs, etc. Now, in order to understand the functioning of fund of funds, let's take an example. The government has set up fund of funds for startup companies. This fund is managed by SIDBI. So, this fund, which is managed by SIDBI, invests money in various alternate investment funds which are registered with SEBI. The objective of these alternate investment funds is funding the startup companies. The AIFs or alternate investment funds, which are supported by government finance fund of funds, would be required to invest at least twice the contribution from fund of funds. It means that if an MSME is investing say rupees 10, then through alternate investment fund, the government would invest rupees 20 in that MSME. And this is what the mechanism the government has planned. And in this fashion, we can see that this particular ratio would be 1:2. Please do remember, here it is mentioned that government would be invested through fund of funds at least twice. So it means that it can actually increase as well. These AIFs, which are supported by fund of funds, is referred to as daughter funds. And by this logic, we can understand that the fund of funds would be considered as the father fund, and the fund in which the fund of fund invest would be considered as daughter fund. So we can see here that fund managed by SIDBI would be like father fund, and AIFs which are registered with SEBI would be daughter funds. On the same lines, the government of India has also set up Electronics Development Fund as fund of funds for the development of electronic manufacturing industries. So what we have understood is fund of funds, daughter funds, electronic development funds, and alternate investment funds, their registration body with SEBI, and these funds being called daughter funds is important from the perspective of prelims examination. In this context, we also need to focus upon the recommendation of UK Sinha Committee. Now, UK Sinha Committee on MSMEs had recommended that we should be setting up a fund of funds for rupees 10,000 crore for MSME sector. According to this committee, this fund of funds should invest in venture capital firms which provide equity support to MSMEs. This fund should be managed by SIDBI only. Now here the government has decided to implement this recommendation and setting up fund of fund for rupees 10,000 crore. Here again you need to understand one more aspect, that the government and the private investment in this case would again be in a ratio. Now when the government invests rupees 10, it would expect rupees 40 to be invested by the private MSME owner. So in this case, we can see that the ratio here would be 1:4. And this is the mechanism that government has installed for the purpose of equity infusion in MSME through fund of funds. The next we need to talk about the financial support which is extended to non-banking financial companies, HFCs and MFIs. Now in order to understand the situation much better, let's first understand the present status. The NBFCs, housing finance corporations and MFIs are facing cash crunch. And this has in turn led to decrease in credit creation within the economy. So, in order to solve this problem, the government has decided to inject liquidity in the NBFCs. The RBI had come up with a 1 lakh crore targeted long-term repo operations or LTROs. Under this tool, the banks would borrow money from the RBI for a period of 3 years and the rate of interest would be linked to repo rate. The money that the banks would borrow would then has to be invested in investment grade bonds, commercial papers issued by NBFCs. This could be understood very well by the flow chart which is given on the right hand side of the screen. Here we can see that there is RBI which has done targeted LTRO. These had maturity period of 3 years and the rate of interest for the 3-year period. These will be lent to banks. Banks would buy investment grade commercial papers and bonds issued by NBFCs and this in turn will improve the liquidity with NBFCs. At the same time, there was a poor response to the scheme which was launched by RBI as banks were risk averse and they did not want to lend loans to NBFCs. So in order to provide financial support to NBFCs which are reeling under stress, the government has launched many initiatives under Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan. The government has come out with rupees 30,000 crore special liquidity scheme. Through this particular scheme, the government has incentivized the banks to borrow money from the RBI through targeted LTRO. The banks are expected to use the borrowed money to inject liquidity in NBFCs, HFCs and MFIs. Under the scheme, the money borrowed by the banks from the RBI would have to be invested in the investment grade bonds, commercial papers issued by NBFCs. Now what government has done to make this deal sweeter? In this case, the government has highlighted that in case of default by NBFCs, the government would repay the entire amount. That is 100% of government guarantee on repayment of such financial instruments. So we can see that the kind of problem that LTRO could not solve in the previous model, in the current model, bank will get 100% guarantee from the government and in this fashion we can see that now when banks are expected to lend to NBFCs, they have a better chance of doing that. As already highlighted, rupees 30,000 crores are earmarked for this particular scheme only. So what we expect from this particular initiative, that the position of NBFC will improve and they will be in a position to create better credit in the market. Next is Partial Credit Guarantee Scheme 2.0, which would lead to expansion of existing scheme to cover liabilities of NBFCs and Housing Finance Corporation. Now in this context, let's first understand the existing Partial Credit Guarantee Scheme which was implemented by the government. Now under the scheme, the public sector banks would purchase highly rated assets of NBFCs and HFCs. Through this measure, the government would ensure that it would inject liquidity and address temporary liquidity crunch. Through this particular scheme, the government provides for 10% of loss guarantee to the assets and which should not exceed a total of rupees 1 lakh crore. Now here it is important to note that the limit of rupees 1 lakh crore refers to the total amount of assets against which guarantee would be extended and not the total amount of guarantee. So in this case, what we can understand that the maximum exposure that government will take under the scheme is rupees 10,000 crore only. That is 10% of rupees 1 lakh crore. As you could imagine that this existing partial credit guarantee scheme, the reason for this is the problem in the existing scheme. The existing scheme provides guarantee on only the assets of NBFCs and HFCs. It does not provide guarantee on the liabilities of the NBFCs, that is bonds, commercial papers which are issued by them to raise money. Now try to understand this through an example. If an NBFC, that is non-banking financial corporation, has lent money to financing infrastructure project, then it becomes an asset and hence it becomes eligible for protection under existing partial credit guarantee fund scheme. However, the commercial paper issued by the NBFC to raise the money and give loans to infrastructure company are considered to be liabilities and hence not eligible for protection under existing scheme. Now this particular problem is basically addressed through partial credit guarantee scheme of 2.0, and going forward we expect that NBFC should be allowed to raise more finances in order to kickstart credit creation. This can be done by giving government guarantees on the liabilities of the NBFCs as well. So what the partial credit guarantee scheme 2.0 brings to the table? The existing partial credit guarantee scheme has now been extended to cover even the liabilities such as commercial papers, bonds, etc. issued by NBFCs and housing finance, etc. Under the new scheme, the bank would allow to make investment in the commercial papers, bonds issued by NBFCs, and in case of default, 20% of the loss would be guaranteed by the government itself. So in this way, we can see that the earlier limit of 10% has been extended to 20%. Apart from that, liabilities of NBFCs and HFCs are also covered under the partial credit guarantee scheme, and this seems to be the step in the right direction which would ensure more credit in the market. Now let us try to understand this entire situation through the flow chart as well. We can see here that there are NBFCs, HFCs and MFIs. They have assets which are like loans, and the partial credit guarantee scheme of 1.0, the banks would buy assets worth rupees 1 lakh crore and inject liquidity into NBFCs. In case of default, the government provides guarantee of 10%, that is 10,000 crores. And this is how the first scheme was working. Now in the second part, we can see that liabilities, which includes commercial papers and bonds, are also protected by the government. Now in the partial credit guarantee scheme of 2.0, bank would buy commercial papers and bonds issued by NBFCs. And in case of default, the government provides guarantees of 20%. And this is how the situation has improved from the previous occasion. And this would ensure more money in the market and would ensure more money in the hands of consumers. Apart from focusing on MSMEs, the government has also highlighted the problems of DISCOMs, real estate projects, and many contractors. Now, in this context, let's first try to understand the problem of DISCOMs. Now, when we talk about DISCOMs, there is a decrease of the demand for electricity due to COVID-19 pandemic. Now, this has led to one simple aspect. It has led to cash flow problems for the DISCOMs. And because of these cash flow problems, these DISCOMs, or the companies which basically engage in power distribution and supply, are unable to clear their dues to power generating companies. This leads to the inability of the power companies to repay their loans, and this has led to increase of NPAs with the bank and the poor credit creation. So this is more of a vicious cycle that we can understand. First, because of COVID-19, the demand for electricity is less. Second, because electricity demand is less, there will be less of power consumption as well. And hence DISCOMs will not be in a position to clear their dues, and hence power generating companies will not be in a position to repay their loans to the banks or any other lending agencies, and this would increase the NPAs of the banks. So the announcement by the government has taken care of the situation. The Power Finance Corporation and Rural Electrification Corporation will infuse liquidity in the DISCOMs to the extent of rupees 90,000 crores in 2 equal installments. This amount will be used by DISCOMs to pay their dues to transmission and generation companies. Further, central public sector generation companies such as NTPC will give rebate to DISCOMs on condition that discounts is passed to the final consumer as a relief. So in this fashion, we can say that the government has taken care of DISCOM companies as well. Now let's focus our attention to the real estate projects. Now, in the case of real estate projects, the Real Estate Regulation Development Act of 2016 provides for time-bound completion of real estate projects. In order to implement this, there is a Real Estate Development Authority which may invoke force majeure clause. Under this clause, the extension of real estate project could be given on account of war, flood, drought, fire, cyclone, earthquake, or any other calamity caused by nature which is affecting the regular development of real estate project. According to the announcement by the government, due to the impact of COVID-19, most of the real estate projects have got stuck, and accordingly the timeline for the completion of real estate projects need to be extended. Accordingly, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs will advise state, union territories and their regulatory authorities about the following. First, treat COVID-19 as an event of force majeure under the RERA Act. Second is extend the registration and completion date suo motu by 6 months. And third is regulatory authority may extend this for another period of 3 months if there is a need. So in this way, we can see that the government has paid attention to the various sectors which are facing liquidity crunch, and they are trying to kickstart the economy by addressing two most important sectors. First, we can see here we are talking about DISCOMs, which is power and electricity. At the same time, we are also focusing on real estate projects in which the money of common people is invested. Now, apart from DISCOMs and real estate, the government has also announced similar relief to contractor as well. All central agencies like Railway, Ministry of Road Transport and Highways and CPWD will give extension up to 6 months for completion of contractual obligations. The obligations could be in the nature of extending the time for the completion of a project or procurement of goods and services. Now, in order to provide relief to the people who are self-employed, the government has also made some changes in the TDS, that is tax deducted at source, and also at tax collected at source or TCS. Now, in this context, let's first try to understand what is the meaning of each term. Now, when we talk about TDS and TCS, these were introduced to collect taxes at the source from which individuals' income is generated. The objective of both the tools is to ensure that tax evasion is minimized, and which is done through the mechanism of taxing the income when it is generated rather than at a later date. TDS or tax deduction at source is a tax that is deducted by payer or buyer of service. Now let's try to understand the situation through an example. Let's assume that you have earned interest on your fixed deposit with the bank. Here, as part of TDS, the bank would deduct the tax income and pay only the remaining amount to you. Hence, we can see that tax that is deducted at the time of making payment. We know that once we go for fixed deposit, and as the fixed deposit matures, the bank pays you after executing the TDS, means a part of the income is deducted which is given to the government directly. So we can see here the income is deducted by the entity that makes the payment. The tax deducted by the bank would then be paid to the government on your behalf. Later, while filing income tax returns, TDS would be considered as tax paid, as this amount would be adjusted against total tax liability of the individual. You might have seen a similar example in terms of winning a lottery prize as well. The tax amount of 5% would be deducted as TDS. Now let's try to understand the situation of TCS or tax collected at source. This is a kind of tax that is collected by the seller from the buyer and then paid to the government. Again, it is very easy to understand. Let's say there is a seller by the name of ABC and he sells goods worth rupees 100 to buyer XYZ. Let's say in this case the government has prescribed TCS or tax collected at source of 5%. Then the seller ABC would collect rupees 105, that is 100 plus 5 rupees of tax from the buyer, out of which 100 would remain with the EVC and the remaining rupees 5 would be paid to the government in form of tax. So we can see here tax is collected by the entity that sells the good. Here it is also explained that this is collected on certain specified goods such as tendu leaves, scrap, mineral ore, motor vehicles, etc. Now, how the new announcement are going to benefit these individuals? The TDS rates for all non-salaried payment to residents, the tax collected at source rate will be reduced by 25% of the specific rate for the remaining period of financial year 2020-21. This will provide liquidity to the tune of rupees 50,000 crore. So what it will ensure that those individuals who are paying taxes in terms of TDS and TCS, the incidence of tax would be reduced by 25%. And in this fashion, they would have more disposable income which they can use to run the economy or buy more goods. And this will actually fuel the demand cycle of the economy. Page number 9 of today's newspaper highlights an item which talks about huge loss for 21 major states. In the subheading, it highlights that rupees 97,100 crores loss in revenue in April only. Now in this context, let's try to understand the news. A recent estimate by India's rating and research, that is Fitch Group, the lockdown has caused 21 major states to suffer a collective revenue loss of rupees 97,100 crores for the month of April only. Both union and state governments are struggling due to dried up cash inflow, but the problem of states are more precarious because actual battle against COVID-19 and the associated expenditure being incurred by them. Now, in this context, let's first try to understand why is the situation worse for the states. Now, in this context, it is a distribution of responsibilities in terms of the union list, state list, and concurrent list is very important. In the state list entry 6, it clearly mentions that public health is the responsibility of state, because health is an entry in state list, which means that health is the primary responsibility of the state. But what is required to ensure that health services work smoothly? In this situation, anybody would have guessed that states require more income. However, because of the lockdown, there's a dramatic decline in the expected incomes, and this is why the states are reeling under so much of financial stress. This brings us to the second important question: how have the state's revenue dried up in this situation? So we know that state's own revenue mainly comes from the seven heads, which is state goods, and the two entities out of the GST purview have not yielded any revenue. These two are first liquor sale ban, which was opened in the month of May only. And second important aspect is the states also earn by imposing value-added tax on petrol and diesel sale. Now there was a negligible sale for state governments in terms of petrol and diesel, as country was in lockdown and there were no transport facilities which were being utilized. Now the next important aspect from which the state generates a lot of revenue is through land deals. Now as the country was under the severe lockdown, there were no land deals, and since there were no land deals, there were no registrations and there were no registration duties which state could have implemented on land deals, and hence this again has gone for a loss. Another related aspect from the perspective of GST is that states' GST collection have been severely affected. We are also aware of the fact that GST compensation for the revenue loss in GST regime has not been timely released. You must be aware of the fact that central government has promised to the state that in case the GST remuneration is not in sync with the expected revenue, then the central government will compensate for that. At the same time, since the month of November, no compensation has been paid to the states. Now we can see that states' own revenue suffering, only limited liquor sale or limited petroleum sale is there. There are almost zero or negligible land deals and nil states GST collection. Now in such a situation, it has become much more difficult for the state to shell out for the salaries, pensions and welfare schemes that they've been running for a long period of time. Now this brings us to the important question: which of the states, when you talk about these 21 states, are most adversely affected? Now the developed states or the industrial states which have high revenues from their own and hence they are less dependent on the center, they are the most adversely impacted because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to lockdown, they have seen maximum decline in their revenues. Now let's try to understand a simple situation. States such as Maharashtra, Kerala, Gujarat, Telangana, Haryana, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu get more than 70% of their revenue from their own sources. Now imagine a situation when this 70% of revenue has dried up. In such a situation, what the states would do in terms of supporting the health infrastructure and also for other public welfare measures. At the same time, it is important for us to understand how bad the situation is for the states. Will this mean that the revenue of the states will be dismal zero or nothing in this case? That is far from truth as well. It will not go down to zero because few of the services which are considered as essential services were kept operational. This has resulted in some revenue to accrue to state government under these heads, including 40% of states' contribution of GST, 30% of the state VAT, and 10% each of electricity tax and non-tax revenues. But at the same time, this situation is very bad for the states. And this situation has been made further worse because of some of the discrimination against the state. Now, in this case, we are aware of the fact that center has declared that corporations, suppose some corporation is working in a state, when this corporation donates to PM Care, it can avail CSR exemptions. At the same time, those donating towards any chief minister's relief fund cannot. Now, in such a situation, what will happen? Suppose there's a corporation by the name of ABC and it has certain funds which is parked and which it wants to give to either to the state or to the central government. Now, since ABC gets benefit in terms of CSR exemption, it will like to pay to the PM Cares fund. So in this case, the PM Care funds would be full, but at the same time, the state funds will hardly get any kind of income through these mechanisms, and hence the states will find it much more difficult to run smooth operations for their health and other infrastructure. As already mentioned, this is a great discouragement for donations to the state funds and has led to diversion of massive state revenues to PM cares. Now we are aware of the fact that India is quasi-federal in nature. At the same time, there are many indicators which show that India is more oriented towards unitary form of government. In this context, we know that all the financial resources which are important or revenue generating to a large extent are taken away by the central government, and the state has very meager resources to run its operation. Now in this context, we have seen that the kind of policy central government has made in the recent past, whether we talk about GST, state's contribution of GST, repayment of the compensation to the state, and then we talk about PM cares, it means that all the state governments would be perpetually on the mercy of the central government. And this is something which is not healthy for a vibrant democracy like India. Page number 11 of today's newspaper highlights an important news which talks about integrated battle groups will soon be operational. Now, this is important more from the perspective of internal security, and this is important not only from the perspective of mains but also from the perspective of coming prelims examination. Now, before moving further, let's first try to understand the context of the news. The Indian Army's Integrated Battle Groups, or IBGs, are meant to ensure faster punitive and defensive operation will come into being by mid of 2020. Now, in this context, it is important for you to know that the Army is awaiting a report on the recent IBG style exercise carried out by the Mountain Strike Corps in Arunachal Pradesh. Now, in this context, they have found three important problems. First, because of the kind of mountainous terrain, the resources that were given to IBG for signal was found to be insufficient, and hence they need to be equipped with better tools and equipments. Second problem that was identified was that the animal transport battalions were not in a position to work properly because of the mountainous terrain. The need was felt that we need better tracks and more load carrying capacity of mules. So in the experiments conducted by the army, these are the major findings, and once we incorporate these tools, we'll be in a position to set up integrated battle groups in the eastern part as well. Now this brings us to the very important question, what are IBGs? Now IBGs are self-contained, agile, brigade-sized fighting units which are proposed in one of the four studies initiated by former Army Chief General Bipin Rawat way back in 2017. It is also important here to know that they are set to replace the current cold start doctrine which called for defensive corps to carry out shallow cross-border thrust within 72 hours of limited objectives such as capture of territory. Now, General Rawat acknowledged the existence of doctrine for the first time in January 2017. Before that, Army never accepted that they follow such kind of a doctrine. Now, coming back to the integrated battle groups, they are expected to perform both offensive roles involving cross-border operations and defensive roles to withstand enemy attack. And this is where we are different from the cold start doctrine. This would be offensive as well as defensive in nature. Now, the leadership of integrated battle groups will be headed by the Major General. The integrated units for the borders will be all encompassing with artillery, armored, combat engineers and signal unit. So we can say that these particular unit will be self-sufficient to carry out operations without any problem. Resources for the IBGs would depend on threat, terrain and task and should be able to mobilize in 12 to 48 hours based on where they are located. So there are quick response teams as well. The composition of every IBG would differ on the basis of the terrain where it is located. In this case, we have talked about the terrain which is mountainous. At the same time, in the southern side, the terrain would be coastal as well. In the similar lines, an IBG which is operating in desert needs to be constituted differently from one operating in the mountains. So these are important from the perspective of internal security and are also important from the perspective of coming prelims and mains examination. With this, we have come to the question of the day. Question of the day reads, cold start doctrine is related to which of the following? Option A, doctrine followed by the USSR and the USA during Cold War. Option B, doctrine followed by Israel to control Golan Heights. Option C, policy followed by Russia to capture Crimea. Or option D, policy followed by India to defend her borders.